The space station looked like a giant metal city floating in the darkness of space. Jake Morrison pressed his face against the window of the transport ship and watched as they got closer. Bright lights covered the station's surface, and ships came and went like busy insects around a hive. This was Station Nexus Prime, home to the most famous military school in the galaxy. Jake was 19 years old and far from home. Earth was just a tiny dot somewhere behind them now. He was the first human to ever attend the Galactic Military Academy. His stomach felt tight with nerves, but he tried not to show it. The transport ship docked with a loud clang. Jake picked up his bag and followed the other passengers off the ship. As soon as he stepped onto the station, he felt different. The gravity was lighter here than on Earth, making him feel like he might float away if he wasn't careful. The halls of the station were huge and clean. The walls were made of shiny metal that reflected everything like mirrors. Strange symbols in different alien languages covered signs and directions boards. Jake had studied some of these languages, but seeing them in person felt weird. Other beings walked through the halls around him. Jake had seen pictures of aliens before, but meeting them face to face was something else. The Kythera looked like living crystals that sang when they talked to each other. Their bodies caught the light and threw it back in rainbow colors. The Gorvani were big and covered in thick armor plates that made them look like walking tanks. They moved slowly but seemed very strong. Jake noticed that all the aliens gave him space when he walked by. They would look at him, then quickly look away and move to the side. Some whispered to each other in their own languages. Jake couldn't understand what they were saying, but he could guess. They were talking about the human. He found his room, number on a list at the information desk. The alien behind the desk was tall and thin with purple skin. It looked at Jake for a long moment before handing him a key card. Room 847B, the alien said in perfect English. Your roommate is already there. Jake thanked the alien and found his way to the living areas. The halls here were quieter, with doors on both sides leading to student rooms. He found room 847B and used his key card to open the door. The room was bigger than he expected. 2 beds sat on opposite sides with desks and storage areas for each student. One side of the room was already decorated with strange plants and colorful items. A blue-scaled alien sat at one of the desks, reading from a glowing tablet. The alien looked up when Jake entered. It had 4 arms and large, friendly eyes. You must be Jake, it said with a smile. I'm Zeph, I'm a Quillarian. Jake set his bag down and shook one of Zeph's hands. The skin felt smooth and cool, like touching a fish. Nice to meet you, Zeph. I have to say, you're not what I expected, Zeph said, looking Jake up and down. You're so small. Jake was used to being average height for a human, but he supposed he might look small to aliens. How tall are most species around here? Well, the Gorvani are usually 8 feet tall. The Nexari are even taller. Even we Quillarians are usually 6 and a half feet. Zeph gestured with all 4 arms as he talked. You're what, 5 feet and 10 inches? Close enough, Jake said. He unpacked his bag and put his clothes in the storage area. What else do you know about humans? Zeph's eyes got wider. Oh, lots of things. Humans come from what we call a death world. Your planet is famous for being one of the most dangerous places in the galaxy. Jake stopped unpacking. Dangerous how? Well, your gravity is twice what most species can handle. Your weather can kill in minutes. You have massive storms that can destroy entire cities. And the wildlife. Zeph made a sound that might have been a shudder. Creatures that hunt in packs, poison that can drop a being in seconds, predators that are bigger and stronger than most intelligent species. Earth's not that bad, Jake said. I mean, yeah, we have storms and dangerous animals, but people live normal lives there. Normal? Zeph's tablet fell from his hands. Jake, they had to reinforce this entire section of the station just so it could hold your weight. Most species would be crushed by your planet's gravity. Jake picked up Zeph's tablet and handed it back. Thanks for the warning, I guess. What else should I know about this place? Zeph took the tablet with 2 hands while using his other 2 to gesture around the room. The Academy trains the best military minds in the galaxy. Students come from over 40 different worlds. The teachers are all war veterans or experts in combat. Sounds intense. It is, but it's also amazing. You'll learn about space battles, ground combat, strategy, and how to work with different species. Zeph paused. Though I should warn you, not everyone here is going to be as friendly as I am. What do you mean? Some species see humans as either too weak to be useful or too dangerous to trust. Your people have only been part of the Galactic Federation for a few years. Many beings don't know what to think of you. Jake sat on his bed and looked around the room. Everything felt so strange and new. The walls curved in ways that Earth buildings never did. The lights were a different color than sunlight. Even the air tasted different. I'll figure it out, Jake said. How hard can it be? Zeph made that shuddering sound again. Jake, tomorrow, you start classes with beings who have been training for war since they could walk. Some of them are from species that see conflict as a natural part of life. Others have abilities that seem like magic compared to what humans can do. And you're going to sit in the same classrooms with them, take the same tests, and compete for the same honors. Zeph set down his tablet and looked at Jake seriously. Some of them might try to test you. Test me how? Challenges, contests of strength or skill. Some species believe that the only way to respect someone is to fight them first. Jake thought about this. On Earth, he had been in a few fights during school, but nothing serious. The idea of fighting aliens with claws and armor plates was not appealing. What happens if I say no to a challenge? Depends on the species. Some will respect that. Others will see it as weakness and treat you badly for the rest of your time here. Jake lay back on his bed and stared at the ceiling. The metal surface was covered in small lights that looked like stars. He wondered if one of those lights was actually the sun of his home system. Zeph, can I ask you something? Sure. Why do they call Earth a death world? I mean, what makes it worse than other planets? Zeph was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was serious. Most worlds that develop intelligent life are peaceful places. Stable weather, gentle gravity, plant-eating animals. The beings that evolve there learn to cooperate and avoid conflict because their world teaches them that working together is the key to survival. That makes sense. But your world is different. Everything on Earth is trying to kill everything else. The weather changes quickly and without warning. The ground shakes and splits open. Mountains explode and cover the sky with ash. The animals are all hunters or prey, and most of them are both. Jake had never thought of Earth that way before. So what does that make humans? Survivors, Zeph said simply. Your species learned to live in a place where death was always close. You had to become tough, smart, and stubborn just to stay alive. Most beings in the galaxy can't understand how you did it. We're not that special. Jake, your people went from living in caves to traveling between stars in less than 10,000 years. Most species take 50,000 years or more to reach that level. You did it while fighting wars, surviving disasters, and dealing with diseases that would wipe out entire populations. Jake rolled over on his side to look at Zeph. You make it sound like we're some kind of super beings. Not super, just different, adapted to survive in ways that most of us never had to learn. Zeph's eyes reflected the ceiling lights. That's why some beings are afraid of humans. They don't know if you're going to be friends or if you're going to treat them like you treat everything else on your death world. We're friendly, Jake said. Humans like making friends. I hope you're right, Zeph said, because tomorrow you start classes and you're going to meet beings who have never seen a human before. Some of them might be curious, others might be scared, and a few might want to see just how tough a Deathworlder really is. Jake closed his eyes and tried to sleep. Outside his window, the lights of the space station continued to blink like stars, and ships came and went in the darkness. Somewhere out there was Earth, with its storms and predators and dangerous gravity. For the first time since leaving home, Jake started to wonder if maybe his planet really was as deadly as everyone said it was. Jake's first day of classes started early. The station's lights slowly brightened to copy a sunrise, though there was no real sun in the emptiness of space. He got dressed in the standard academy uniform, a gray suit that fit all species with some adjustments. His felt loose in some places and tight in others. Zeph was already awake. eating something that looked like purple soup from a bowl. "Breakfast," he said, holding up the bowl. "Want some?" Jake looked at the purple liquid and decided against it. "I'll find something later." They walked together through the halls toward the academic section. The corridors were busy with students, heading to their first classes. Jake saw species he had never imagined before. Some walked on two legs like humans, others floated in the air, and a few moved along the walls using sticky limbs. "There's the cafeteria." Zeph pointed to a large opening with dozens of different food stations inside. Each species has its own area with food they can actually eat. The human section is over there. Jake looked where Zeph was pointing and saw a small area with familiar-looking foods. A few other humans were there, but they were older and wore different uniforms. "Probably teachers or staff?" "How many humans work here?" Jake asked. "You're the first human student," Zeph said. "But there are maybe 20 humans total on the station. Most of them are teachers or technical specialists." They reached the classroom and went inside. Jake immediately noticed that his seat was different from all the others. While most students sat in chairs or platforms designed for their specific body types, Jake had what looked like a reinforced metal chair that seemed much too strong for someone his size. Other students filed in around them. Jake tried not to stare, but it was hard not to look at beings he had only seen in pictures before. The Gorvani students wore their natural armor plates and moved with heavy, deliberate steps. The Kythera students made musical sounds when they talked to each other, their crystal bodies catching and reflecting the classroom lights. A group of red-skinned aliens with sharp teeth took seats near the back. Zeph leaned over and whispered, "Those are Vorthak, warrior species. They respect strength above everything else." "Good to know," Jake whispered back. The teacher entered the room, and all conversation stopped. She was tall and thin with an insect-like appearance. Her large compound eyes could probably see in directions Jake couldn't even imagine. Two smaller arms worked constantly with tablets and controls while her main arms gestured as she talked. "I am Professor Vextar," she said in a clicking voice. "This is Advanced Combat Theory. In this class, you will learn how different species approach warfare, survival, and conflict resolution." Jake opened his tablet and started taking notes. The information was interesting but also overwhelming. Professor Vextar talked about battles that had happened thousands of years ago between species Jake had never heard of. She described weapons and tactics that seemed like magic compared to human technology. "Combat is not just about strength or speed," Professor Vextar continued. "It is about understanding your opponent, adapting to new situations, and surviving when everything goes wrong." A Vorthak student raised his hand. "Professor, what about species that have no real combat experience? How can they be effective in military situations?" Professor Vextar's compound eyes turned toward the student. "An interesting question, Vextar. Can you give an example of such a species?" The Vorthak student looked directly at Jake. "Humans, for example. Their world may be dangerous, but they have no experience with real military conflicts against other species." Jake felt every eye in the room turn toward him. The silence stretched out uncomfortably long. Professor Vexistar seemed to be waiting for him to respond. "Actually," Jake said, keeping his voice steady, "humans have plenty of experience with military conflicts." "Against what?" Braktar asked with a sound that might have been laughter. "Wild animals?" "Against each other," Jake replied. "Humans have been fighting wars for thousands of years. We've fought with swords, spears, guns, bombs, and weapons that can destroy entire cities." The classroom was completely quiet now. Even Professor Vextar had stopped her constant clicking. "You fight your own species?" asked a Kythera student, her crystal body flashing different colors. "Sometimes," Jake said. "Humans don't always agree on things. When we can't solve problems with words, sometimes we solve them with war." "That's barbaric," said another student. Jake shrugged. "Maybe. But it also taught us a lot about conflict, strategy, and survival. When you've been fighting each other for thousands of years, you get good at it." Professor Vextar's mandibles clicked rapidly. "This is an important point. Different species learn about conflict in different ways. The Vorthak learn through ritual combat. The Quillarians learn through simulation and theory. Humans, it seems, learn through actual experience. Experience that makes them dangerous, Braktar said, though he no longer sounded mocking. Experience that makes them survivors, corrected a new voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to look at the speaker. Jake's blood went cold. Standing. In the doorway was something out of a nightmare. The being was nearly 8 feet tall with black skin that seemed to absorb light. Forearms ended in claws that looked like they could cut through metal. But the worst part was its eyes. They were completely black, like looking into empty space. The entire classroom recoiled. Students pressed themselves against the walls or tried to hide behind their desks. Even the confident Vorthak warriors showed fear. "Class," Professor Vextar said, though her voice was less steady than before. "I would like you to meet Krathnor. He is a Nexari warrior who will be helping with our practical demonstrations." Jake had heard of the Nexari. They were legends throughout the galaxy. Born on a world of eternal darkness, they were perfect predators. For thousands of years, they had been the most feared warriors in known space. They could move without sound, kill without being seen, and strike fear into the hearts of even the bravest soldiers. Krathnor moved into the classroom like a shadow come to life. His footsteps made no sound on the metal floor. Students moved out of his way without being asked, as if their bodies knew instinctively to avoid this predator. "The Nexari understand survival," Krathnor said, his voice like grinding stone. "We have studied every species in the galaxy. We know their weaknesses, their fears, their breaking points." His black eyes scanned the room, lingering on each student. When those eyes reached Jake, something strange happened. Instead of looking away or showing fear like the others, Jake met the gaze directly. Most beings couldn't look at a Nexari for more than a few seconds. The instinctive fear was too strong. But Jake held the eye contact, his expression curious rather than afraid. Krathnor's head tilted slightly, the first sign of emotion he had shown. "Interesting," Professor Vextar observed. "Mr. Morrison seems unaffected by Nexari intimidation techniques. Should I be affected?" Jake asked, still looking at Krathnor. "I mean, we're in a classroom. He's here to teach, not to hunt." A collective gasp came from the other students. Several looked at Jake as if he had just signed his own death warrant. Krathnor took a step closer, his claws extended slightly, catching the light. "You do not fear me, human?" Jake thought about this seriously. "Not really. Should I? My species has conquered worlds. We are death itself given form." "That's impressive," Jake said honestly. "My species went from making fire to splitting atoms in about 10,000 years. We turned our death world into a garden and then left it to explore the stars." He paused, then added, "We did it all while fighting each other the entire time." The silence that followed was complete. No one moved, no one spoke, no one seemed to breathe. Krathnor's mandibles clicked once, a sound that made several students jump. "You compare your achievements to our reputation for violence." "Not comparing," Jake said. "Just saying that every species is good at different things. You're good at being scary. We're good at not staying scared." Professor Vexitar's compound eyes focused intently on the exchange between human and Nexari. This was not going according to any script she might have planned. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "we should begin with a basic demonstration. Krathnor, would you show the class some fundamental intimidation techniques?" The Nexari warrior nodded slowly, his black eyes never leaving Jake's face. "Very well. Observe and learn." What happened next was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Krathnor demonstrated how his species used darkness and movement to create fear in their opponents. He showed how they could become nearly invisible, how their claws could extend and retract without sound, and how their very presence could trigger panic responses in most species. During each demonstration, students cowered, trembled, or in some cases actually fainted. The Quillarian scales shifted through entire spectrums of fear colors. The Gorvani pulled their armored heads into their shells. Even the proud Vorthak warriors stepped back from the shadow predator. Jake watched with the calm attention of someone observing an interesting lecture. Now, Professor Vextar announced when the demonstration was complete. Who would like to volunteer for a practical exercise? The classroom became a vacuum of silence. No one moved, no one breathed, no one wanted to attract the attention of the living weapon at the front of the room. Jake raised his hand. The gasps that followed came from every species present. Zeph grabbed Jake's arm with two of his hands. "Jake, no," he whispered. Jake walked to the front of the classroom while every student watched in shocked silence. The demonstration area was a circle marked on the floor with metal lines. Crathnor stood in the center, his forearms spread wide, claws fully extended. He looked like death given physical form. "The exercise is simple," Professor Vextar explained, her voice more careful than before. "Crathnor will use standard intimidation techniques to try to make the volunteer submit. Most students yield within seconds." "What's the record?" Jake asked as if he was asking about the weather. "The longest anyone has lasted is 37 seconds, the professor replied. "A Vorthak battle champion." Jake nodded and looked at Braktar, the red-skinned warrior who had challenged him earlier. "Good to know." Professor Vextar activated a holographic timer that appeared above the demonstration area. "Begin when ready." Crathnor immediately changed. The Nexari warrior shifted into full hunting mode, becoming something that nightmares were made of. He began circling Jake, moving with fluid grace that seemed to defy the laws of physics. His claws scraped against the metal floor, creating a sound like knives on glass that made several students cover their ears. Jake stood in the center of the circle, hands in his pockets, turning his head to follow the movement like someone watching a dance performance. 10 seconds passed, then 20, then 30. Crathnor increased his efforts. He moved faster, becoming a blur of shadow and menace. He hissed and clicked, using sounds designed to trigger the deepest fear responses in prey animals. His form seemed to multiply, creating the illusion that several predators were circling Jake at once. Jake continued to watch with mild interest, occasionally nodding as if appreciating a particularly clever move. 40 seconds. 50. A full minute. Theo. Classroom was completely silent except for the scraping of claws and the predator sounds from Crathnor. Students stared in disbelief. Even Professor Vexitar had stopped her constant clicking. At the 90-second mark, something unprecedented happened. Crathnor stopped moving and stood directly in front of Jake. "Why do you not yield?" The Nexari demanded, genuine confusion in his voice. Jake shrugged. "You're not actually threatening me, you're performing. It's impressive, don't get me wrong, but it's still just a show. I could end your life in less than a second." "Probably," Jake agreed easily. "But you won't. We're in a classroom, you're a professional instructor, and honestly..." He paused, and that calm expression never changed. "I've dealt with scarier things before lunch." The timer showed 2 minutes and 15 seconds when Professor Vextar finally called for a stop. Several students were recording everything, their devices capturing what would become one of the most famous incidents in Academy history. "Explain," Crathnor said, stepping closer to Jake. "What could be more frightening than facing a Nexari warrior?" Jake sat on the edge of the demonstration platform. "Well, yesterday I had to give a presentation in Galactic economics class. Public speaking is terrifying." Several nearby students looked at him as if he had completely lost his mind. "Before that," Jake continued, "I had to call my mom back on Earth to tell her I failed my first quantum mechanics test. She's a physics professor. That conversation was genuinely scary." Crathnor's mandibles clicked rapidly. "These are not life-threatening situations." "No, but they're real threats," Jake explained. "Look, I get what you're doing. You're using evolutionary triggers, darkness, predator behaviors, threat displays. It's smart strategy against most species. But humans?" Jake stood up and began pacing as he talked. "We come from a world where everything is trying to kill us. Not just the predators, but the weather, the diseases, the natural disasters, even the plants. We didn't just survive on that world. We took over." Professor Vextar moved closer, her compound eyes reflecting deep interest. "Continue." "Most species Here evolved on worlds where cooperation meant survival, Jake said, gesturing to his classmates. You developed intelligence to avoid conflict, to find peaceful solutions. That's smart. His expression became more serious. Humans developed intelligence to become better at surviving impossible situations. We spent hundreds of thousands of years as persistence hunters. We would chase prey animals until they died from exhaustion because they couldn't run anymore. The classroom had gone completely silent again. We survived ice ages that lasted tens of thousands of years. We lived through volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun. We fought plagues that killed half our population and kept going. We looked at the most dangerous creatures on our world and thought, I wonder what that tastes like. Jake turned to face Crathnor directly. My great-grandfather fought in something called World War II. 60 million humans died in that war. Know what we did right after? We went to the moon. Not because we needed to, but because it seemed like a fun challenge. Crathnor was listening with the focused attention of a predator studying new prey. We split atoms to make power, then used the same technology to make bigger bombs. We looked at the deepest parts of our oceans and decided to explore them even, though the pressure would crush us instantly. We saw space, cold, empty, airless space, and thought it looked like a nice place to build cities. Jake walked closer to the HFY warrior. Every human child grows up learning about sharks, bears, poisonous snakes, and tornadoes. We tell kids bedtime stories about monsters under the bed. We make movies about serial killers for entertainment. We invented extreme sports because our regular lives weren't dangerous enough. But I could kill you, Crathnor insisted, though he sounded less certain than before. So could a car accident, a bee sting if I'm allergic, or slipping in the shower, Jake replied matter-of-factly. Death is always one mistake away for humans. The difference is we don't spend our lives hiding from it. Braktar, the Vorthak warrior, spoke up from the back of the room. You claim your species is not afraid of death? Jake turned to look at him. Of course we're afraid of death. Fear keeps you alive. But being afraid and being paralyzed by fear are two different things. Humans learned a long time ago that if you spend all your time being scared, you miss out on living. Professor Vexitar's mandibles clicked rapidly. This explains many anomalies in human psychological profiles. Your species has an unusually high tolerance for risk-taking behavior. High tolerance? Jake laughed. Professor, we have people who jump out of perfectly good aircraft for fun. We have a sport where people strap boards to their feet and slide down mountains covered in frozen water at high speed. We created drinks with so much caffeine in them that they're basically legal drugs, and we give them to teenagers. The absurdity of human behavior was beginning to dawn on the other students. Here was a species that had not only survived one of the most dangerous worlds in the galaxy, but had become so adapted to danger that they actively sought it out for recreation. Zeph raised one of his 4 hands tentatively. Jake, what do humans do to relax? Jake thought for a moment. We watch movies about disasters and serial killers. We play games where we pretend to fight in wars. We read books about the end of the world. Some people keep venomous spiders and snakes as pets. The collective shudder that went through the classroom was almost visible. A Cathara student, her crystal body flashing nervous colors, asked, How do human children survive to adulthood? Carefully, Jake replied, and with a lot of luck. Human parents spend most of their time keeping their kids from accidentally killing themselves. Kids want to climb everything, taste everything, and explore everything, even when it's dangerous. That sounds like a species-wide death wish, observed a Gorvani student. Maybe, Jake admitted. Or maybe it's what you get when evolution teaches you that the best defense against a dangerous world is to become more dangerous than anything else on it. Crathnor had been silent during this exchange, his black eyes studying Jake intently. Finally he spoke. You interest me, human. Your species confuses the natural order. You are individually weak, yet collectively unstoppable. You fear death, yet seek danger. You create art about destruction, then build cities in places where natural disasters are common. We're contradictory, Jake agreed. It's one of our better features. I would like to understand this better, Crathnor said. Perhaps we could continue this discussion outside of class. The suggestion that an HFY warrior wanted to have a voluntary conversation with a student, especially a human student, sent another wave of shock through the classroom. "Sure," Jake said easily. "I'd like to learn more about your species too. I bet you have some interesting stories about survival." Professor Vextar looked between the human and the HFY with something that might have been amazement. "Class? Dismissed," she announced. "I believe we have covered enough material for today." As students filed out of the classroom, they gave Jake a much wider space than before. But now it wasn't because they were afraid of him. It was because they were afraid of what he represented. A species so adapted to danger that they treated legendary killers like interesting conversation partners. Jake packed up his notes while Krathnor waited nearby. The HFY warrior watched the human's calm, efficient movements with the attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Tell me, Krat." News of Jake's encounter with Krathnor spread through the academy faster than light-speed communications. By the end of the day, every student on the station had heard some version of the story. Most versions were wildly wrong, but they all agreed on one point. The human had faced down an HFY warrior and walked away. Jake found this attention uncomfortable. Everywhere he went, students stopped their conversations to stare at him. Some looked afraid, others seemed curious, and a few appeared to be studying him like he was a new type of weapon they needed to understand. "This is getting weird," Jake told Zeph as they sat in the cafeteria eating dinner. Jake had found the human food section and was enjoying something that almost tasted like pizza. Zeph was eating his purple soup again. "Weird how?" Zeph asked, though he was also looking around at all the staring students. "Everyone's acting like I did something amazing. I just had a conversation." "Jake, you had a conversation with an HFY. Most species in the galaxy consider that impossible. HFY don't talk to other beings unless they're about to kill them." A group of Kythera students approached their table. The crystal beings moved with musical steps, their bodies chiming softly with each movement. The one in front, whose body flashed more colors than the others, spoke first. "Excuse me," she said, in a voice like wind chimes. "You are Jake Morrison, the human?" "That's me," Jake said, looking up from his food. "We are curious about your species," another Kythera said. "Would you answer some questions for our cultural studies project?" Jake looked at Zeph, who shrugged with all four arms. "Sure, I guess. What do you want to know?" The lead Kythera activated a recording device. "Is it true that humans evolved from predator animals?" "Not exactly," Jake said. "We evolved from animals that were both predators and prey. Early humans hunted other animals for food, but we were also hunted by bigger, stronger creatures." "How did you survive against superior enemies?" Jake thought about this while chewing his pizza. "We got smarter. When we couldn't outrun something, we learned to outlast it. When we couldn't outfight it, we learned to outthink it. When individual humans weren't strong enough, we worked together in groups." "But your world has extreme weather patterns," one of the other Kythera said. "How did primitive humans survive ice ages and volcanic winters?" "The same way we survived everything else. We adapted. We learned to make clothes, build shelters, store food for long periods. When the environment changed, we changed with it." The Kythera students looked at each other, their bodies flashing rapid color communications that Jake couldn't understand. "One more question," the lead Kythera said. "Is it true that humans still fight wars against each other?" "Sometimes," Jake admitted. "Not as much as we used to, but yes. Humans don't always agree on things." "Even though you know war causes death and suffering?" Jake set down his food and gave this question serious thought. "Humans are complicated. We're capable of great kindness and terrible cruelty, sometimes in the same person. We've fought wars over resources, territory, religion, and political ideas. But we've also worked together to cure diseases, explore space, and create art." "This is confusing," one of the Kythera said. "Yeah, we get that a lot," Jake replied. After the Kythera students left, more groups approached. Gorvani students wanted to know about human military tactics. Quilarian students asked about human diplomacy and trade. Even some Vorthak warriors came by to ask about human concepts of honor and courage. Jake answered their questions as best he could, but he was getting tired of being the representative for all of humanity. "I need some air," he told Zeph after the fifth group of curious students had left. "There's an observation deck on level 12, Zeph suggested. "It's usually pretty quiet." Jake made his way to the observation deck, which was a large room with transparent walls that looked out into space. A few students were there, studying or just watching the stars, but they gave him space when he entered. He found an empty section and sat down, looking out at the endless darkness dotted with distant suns. Earth was out there somewhere, a tiny, blue dot that suddenly seemed very far away. "The view is impressive," said a familiar grinding voice behind him. Jake turned to see Krathnor approaching. The Nexari warrior moved silently across the deck, his black form almost invisible against the darkness of space beyond the windows. "It is," Jake agreed. "Makes you feel small." Krathnor sat down nearby, though he chose a position where he could see both Jake and the rest of the observation deck. Old habits of a predator species, Jake supposed. "You have become famous," Krathnor observed. "I didn't mean to. I just acted normal. That is what makes you interesting. Normal for a human is abnormal for everyone else." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching ships come and go from the station's docking bays. Finally, Krathnor spoke again. "I have been studying human history since our encounter. What did you find?" "Contradictions. Your species creates beautiful art, then destroys it in wars. You show great compassion for other beings, then compete ruthlessly for resources. You explore space to expand knowledge, but also to gain military advantages." Jake nodded. "That sounds about right." "How do you reconcile these contradictions?" "We don't really. Humans are individuals first and a species second. Some humans are peaceful, others are aggressive. Some create, others destroy. Most of us are capable of both, depending on the situation." Krathnor's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "The Nexari are not like this. We are hunters always. Our nature is consistent. That must be simpler, perhaps, but also limiting. Your species has achieved things that mine never considered, because we were too focused on being perfect predators." A comfortable silence fell between them again. Jake found it strange that he felt more relaxed talking to a legendary killer than he did answering questions from curious students. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said. "Yes." "What's your homeworld like?" Krathnor was quiet for a long moment. "Nexthara is a world of eternal darkness. Our sun died long ago, before my species evolved. We live by geothermal energy and hunt by senses other than sight. The surface is covered in predators that have evolved to kill in the dark." Sounds harsh. It is. Only the strongest and smartest survive to adulthood, those who do become perfect hunters. "But you left your world to come here, why?" Krathnor turned his black eyes toward Jake. "The same reason you did, I think. To learn. My species believes we are the ultimate predators, but meeting other species has shown us that survival takes many forms." "Like what?" "The Gorvani survive, through strength and armor. The Quilarians survive through intelligence and cooperation. The Kithara survive through adaptation and flexibility." He paused. "Humans survive through stubbornness." Jake laughed. "Stubbornness? Your species refuses to give up. When faced with impossible situations, other species find ways to avoid them or adapt to them. Humans find ways to change the situation entirely. Is that good or bad? It is effective and dangerous. A species that refuses to accept limitations will either achieve great things or destroy itself trying. Which do you think humans will do?" Krathnor considered this carefully. "Both, probably. Your species seems capable of simultaneously reaching for the stars and fighting over who gets to plant the flag." They talked for another hour about their respective worlds, their species' histories, and their personal reasons for being at the academy. Jake learned that Krathnor was not just a warrior, but also a scholar who studied other species to better understand how they survived in different environments. "Your turn," Krathnor said eventually. "What do you hope to achieve here?" Jake thought about this. I want to understand how different species work together. Humans are good at surviving, but we're not always good at cooperating with others. If I can learn how the galaxy maintains peace between dozens of different species, maybe I can help humans fit in better. An admirable goal, also difficult. The best goals usually are. As they prepared to leave the observation deck, Krathnor made an unexpected offer. Would you be interested in learning some Nexari combat techniques? Not to make you a killer, but to help you understand how predator species think. Jake was surprised. You'd teach me? In exchange for you teaching me more about human persistence and adaptation strategies. I believe we could learn much from each other. Deal, Jake said, extending his hand. Krathnor looked at the offered hand for a moment, then carefully gripped it with one of his clawed hands. The handshake was awkward. Human and Nexari anatomy were very different, but it felt significant. Zag. They walked back toward the residential area as Jake realized that something important had just happened, not just for him personally, but for human-galactic relations in general. If a human and a Nexari could become friends, maybe there was hope for all the other species to get along too. One more question, Jake said as they reached the corridor, where their paths would separate. Yes? What did you really think when I didn't back down from you in class? Krathnor's mandibles clicked in what Jake was learning to recognize as amusement. I thought, finally, a species that might understand what it means to be truly dangerous. And now? Now I think humans might be the most dangerous species in the galaxy, precisely because you don't think you are. With that cryptic comment, the Nexari warrior disappeared into the shadows of the corridor, leaving Jake to wonder exactly what he meant. But as Jake made his way back to his room, where Zeph was probable 3 months had passed since Jake's first encounter with Krathnor, and life at the academy had settled into a routine that would have seemed impossible on that first day. The human who had once been avoided by other students was now at the center of the most unlikely group of friends the academy had ever seen. Jake sat in the advanced strategy classroom, working on a group project with his team: Zeph the Quillarian, Braktar the Vorthak warrior, Lysa the Cathera scholar, and Thorgan the Gorvani engineer. They were designing a rescue mission for civilians trapped on a hostile world, and each species brought their own unique perspective to the problem. The Quillarian approach would be diplomatic contact with the hostile forces, Zeph said, manipulating a holographic display with all 4 arms. We could negotiate safe passage for the civilians. The Vorthak way is direct assault, Braktar declared, his red skin darkening with excitement. Overwhelm the enemy with superior force and extract the civilians quickly. Both approaches have merit, Lysa chimed, her crystal body flashing thoughtful blues and greens. But we should also consider environmental adaptation. The Cathara would study the hostile conditions and find ways to help the civilians survive longer while rescue operations proceed. Thorgan, the massive Gorvani, spoke in his slow, rumbling voice. Engineering solutions. Build shelters. Establish supply drops. Create safe zones with defensive barriers. All eyes turned to Jake. What's the human approach? Zeph asked. Jake studied the holographic planet spinning before them. The world was marked with radiation zones, hostile weather patterns, and enemy positions. Humans would probably do all of those things at once, he said finally. Negotiate while preparing for assault, adapt to the environment while building defenses, and have 3 backup plans in case everything goes wrong. Simultaneously? Braktar asked. We're good at multitasking when lives are at stake. Professor? Vextar observed their group work from across the room. Over the past months, she had watched Jake's integration into the academy community with great interest. The human had not only adapted to galactic society, but had begun changing it in small but significant ways. Other students had started adopting human problem-solving techniques. The direct, persistent approach that humans favored had proven effective in many scenarios. More importantly, Jake's friendship with beings from different species had created a ripple effect throughout the academy. Time, Professor Vextar announced. Present your solutions. Each group took turns explaining their rescue scenarios. The presentations were good, showing the traditional strengths of each species. Then Jake's group took their turn. Our mission: Plan is called adaptive persistence, Jake announced. We use simultaneous multiple approaches with contingency planning. The holographic display showed their solution. Quilarian diplomats would make contact with hostile forces, while Vorthak, assault teams prepared for combat. Cathara specialists would help civilians adapt to harsh conditions, while Gorvani engineers built temporary shelters. Human coordinators would manage all operations and adjust tactics in real time based on changing conditions. The key is flexibility, Lysa explained, her body flashing excited colors. If diplomacy fails, we're already prepared for assault. If assault becomes too costly, we have fortified positions and adapted civilians who can wait for better conditions. Each approach supports the others, Thorgan added. Engineering provides safe zones for diplomacy and staging areas for assault. Adaptation techniques keep civilians alive longer, giving all other approaches more time to succeed. Professor Vextar's compound eyes focused intently on their presentation. And if all primary approaches fail? Then we get creative, Jake said simply. Humans are good at improvising. What does that mean? Asked a student from another group. Jake grinned. It means we do something no one expects. Maybe we fake a natural disaster to force evacuation. Maybe we convince the hostile forces that the planet is about to be invaded by someone even worse than them. Maybe we turn the civilians into a rescue team that saves themselves. Those are highly irregular tactics, Professor Vextar observed. But they would probably work, admitted Braktar grudgingly. Humans have a talent for chaos-based solutions. After class, Jake's diverse group of friends headed to their usual meeting spot in the Academy's recreation area. Over the months, other students had begun joining them, creating an ever-growing circle of interspecies friendship. Krathenor was waiting for them when they arrived. The Nexari warrior had become a regular part of their group, though his presence still made some newcomers nervous. How did the presentation go? Krathenor asked. We used your suggestion about psychological warfare, Jake replied. The idea of convincing enemies that they're facing a bigger threat. Nexari tactics adapted. For rescue operations, Krathenor mused. Interesting application. This had become their pattern. Each species shared their knowledge and techniques, but they adapted them for purposes beyond their original intent. Nexari stealth techniques became search and rescue methods. Vorthak combat strategies became sports competitions. Quilarian diplomacy became conflict resolution between student groups. Jake, Lysa said, her crystal body shifting to curious colors. We've been wondering about something. What's that? Why are you really here? Not the official reason about cultural exchange, the real reason. Jake was quiet for a moment, looking around at his friends. Zeph with his 4 arms and scales that changed color with his emotions. Braktar, with his warrior's pride and surprisingly gentle nature. Lysa with her crystal form and musical communication. Thorgan with his massive strength and careful engineering mind. Krathenor with his predator instincts and scholarly curiosity. Earth is going to join the galactic community eventually, Jake said finally. When that happens, humans are going to meet all kinds of beings we've never imagined. Some will be peaceful like the Quilarians. Others will be warriors like the Vorthak, or predators like the Nexari. He paused, organizing his thoughts. Humans have a history of being afraid of things we don't understand. Sometimes that fear leads to conflict. I wanted to learn how to understand different species so I could help other humans do the same. And what have you learned? Krathenor asked. That every species has reasons for being the way they are. The Nexari are predators because their world taught them that only perfect hunters survive. The Vorthak value strength because their culture developed around proving yourself worthy of respect. The Quilarians prize cooperation because their world required it for survival. Jake stood up and began pacing, a habit he had developed when thinking through complex problems. Humans developed on a world that required all of those traits at different times. We had to be hunters and cooperators and warriors and diplomats and engineers, sometimes all in the same day. That makes humans adaptable, Zeph observed. But also unpredictable, Braktar added. Both, Jake agreed. Jake. The question is whether that will make humans good galactic citizens or dangerous neighbors. What do you think? Lisa asked. Jake looked out through the transparent walls at the stars beyond. I think it depends on how we're introduced to the galaxy. If humans feel welcome and respected, we'll probably be good allies. If we feel threatened or excluded, we might become a problem. And your mission is to prevent that, Crathnor said. My mission is to build bridges, to show other species that humans can be trusted, and to show humans that the galaxy is full of friends we haven't met yet. Professor Vextar's voice interrupted their conversation. Mr. Morrison, could I speak with you privately? Jake followed the professor to a quiet corner of the recreation area. Her compound eyes studied him with the intensity that had made her a legendary instructor. Your integration project has been more successful than anyone anticipated, she said. The Academy administration has been observing the changes in interspecies cooperation since your arrival. Changes? Students from different species are working together more effectively than ever before. Conflict resolution between groups has improved dramatically. Even species that have been traditional rivals are finding common ground. Jake wasn't sure if this was good news or bad news. Is that a problem? On the contrary, it's exactly what the Academy hoped to achieve. You've demonstrated that peaceful coexistence is possible between species with very different natures. Professor Vextar paused, her mandibles clicking thoughtfully. Which brings me to an offer. The Galactic Federation would like you to stay beyond your exchange period. They want to establish a permanent human presence at the Academy, with you as the first human instructor. Jake was stunned. Instructor, but I'm still learning. You would be teaching what you've learned about interspecies cooperation and adaptive problem solving. Your methods have proven effective. Jake looked back at his friends, who were engaged in animated discussion about their next group project. Zeph was using all four arms to gesture while Braktar made warrior boasts. Lysa was flashing rapid colors in Kythera amusement, while Thorgan provided steady, logical commentary. Crathnor observed everything with the calm attention of a predator, who had learned to appreciate the hunt of ideas rather than prey. Can I think about it? Jake asked. Of course.